Hey folks, welcome back to the show. Let's talk a little bit about today's episode, our guest. Can you imagine unlocking the secret to longevity through a powerful compound that was discovered on a remote island, almost by accident? In this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast, we chat with Dr. Ross Pelton, a renowned scientist and author about Rapamycin, a compound with untold potential for revolutionizing health and extending life. Those of you in the medical profession might know it as an immune suppressant, but it turns out that it may have altogether different benefits for us, used differently. Together, we trace Rapamycin's fascinating history from its origins on Easter Island to its current potential as a life-extending compound, delving into its dual mechanisms, mTOR and autophagy, for a fresh outlook on cellular metabolism and the aging process. Ross Pelton is a pharmacist, nutritionist, author, and a health educator who is widely recognized as the world's leading authority on drug-induced nutrient depletions. He was named one of the top 50 most influential pharmacists in the U.S. by American Druggist magazine for his work in natural medicine. Okay, to learn more about and connect with Dr. Ross Pelton, you can go to naturalpharmacist.net. To get your hands on his book on Rapamycin, all you have to do is call Life Extension at number 1-866-598-6747, and you can get your hands on his book. Now, if you don't want to make a phone call, you can get it on Amazon. But if you do that, make sure that you get the second edition and not the first edition. And we talk in the episode about how to get your hands on Rapamycin if you decide to do that, or Rapapro. And to do that, you'll need to use code longevity15 when you go to the anti-aging store. And now let's jump into the episode. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Dr. Ross Pelton, it is such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
It's really a pleasure to have time with you and your listeners and your viewers.
Yeah, well, that's right. They're all of the above, right?
Yeah.
Who was it? Oh, it was Neil Burchett from Profound Health who introduced us. And whenever I get an email from Neil with a guest suggestion, my ears perk up, because anybody who he knows, generally between him and Phil Mikens, these guys are so well connected.
Yeah.
And so all they had to say was Ross Pelton and Rapamycin. And I was like, I'm in. Just tell me when and where to be. I'm all in. So Rapamycin is, and I mean, it's only one of your many passions, as we talked about. But today we're going to be a little disciplined and we're going to stick to Rapamycin. We might do a sidestep into the microbiome, but what got you interested in Rapamycin? Tell us a little bit about this fascination.
I got introduced to Rapamycin when I attended a life extension conference in Las Vegas about 5 years ago or so. And so I just had it on my radar, and because I'm interested in everything related to health and anti-aging and life extension, I started following it. And as I looked deeper into it, I found out that there are thousands and thousands of scientific papers written and published on Rapamycin and mTOR and autophagy, but nobody'd written a book about it to explain it to the general public. And I'm an author. The Rapamycin book is my 12th book. And so my interest in Rapamycin shifted from an interest level to an obsession.
Yeah.
And
lucky us.
So I just holed myself up for about 6 months and just poured over thousands and thousands of papers and talked to all the experts and wrote a book that is really kind of it covers the whole range of the history and the background and dosing and the animal experiments and the controversies about it. And my book accelerates the learning curve for anybody that's interested in Rapamycin. A lot of people will give my book to their physician to educate their physician to get them to write a prescription for Rapamycin for them.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. It's the primary source if anybody wants to get on a learning curve for Rapamycin.
Yeah. No, and you know what's great about, there's a lot of great things about your book, quite apart from the fact that it's very thorough, is that it's written, it's an easy read, right?
Yeah,
it's not a slog. And and it's not super long, and yet it's full of information. So it
One of
hits
the
all the
things I
marks.
say about myself in my bio is that I'm bilingual. My two languages are English and science.
Yeah.
And I can talk about the science so that non-scientific people can understand it. Some people get kind of intimidated by seeing new terms like mTOR and autophagy. And my response is, do you speak English? Read my book, and I explain these things 4 or 5 times. You'll get to understand what they are and why they are important. And there will be new terms in your vocabulary that you are really happy to know about.
Love it. So you just mentioned the 3-legged stool here, the trifecta, the rapamycin, the mTOR, and autophagy. So maybe let's define those 3 for the audience who may not be familiar. I mean, at this point, I think mTOR, autophagy for sure. There's a reasonable number of people. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a mTOR syndrome, your phrase. Sure. But let's start by maybe giving people a grounding in those 3 concepts.
So right at the beginning of my book, I say there are 2 main topics in my book. One is rapamycin, which is this new drug, which is literally the most effective life extension drug that's ever been discovered, getting anywhere from 20 to 60% life extension in multiple different animal models. But then there's autophagy and mTOR, which in my mind is really more important than the drug rapamycin itself, because understanding mTOR and autophagy has provided us with a total new understanding of cellular metabolism and health and the aging process. So I'll get into that secondarily. First, let's start with rapamycin. The history of rapamycin goes back to 1966, when a group of Canadian scientists made a scientific expedition to Easter Island. And the purpose of that scientific expedition was to find sources of new potential antifungal and antibiotic drugs. So they took a lot of soil samples, and one of the soil samples contained this compound, rapamycin, that's produced by a strain of soil bacteria. So one of the things I like to emphasize is this is not some exotic compound that a pharmaceutical company has made that nature has never seen before. This is something that occurs naturally in nature. And the indigenous people's name for Easter Island is Rapa Nui. So they named the drug rapamycin.
Okay.
So research started on it as an antifungal drug. And then it was discovered that it suppresses the immune system. So all that research came to a screaming halt. But in September of 1996, the FDA approved rapamycin for treatment for people who get kidney transplants, because people who get organ transplants need to stay on immune suppressing drugs for the rest of their life so their body doesn't reject their new organ. Samples of rapamycin were sent off to the National Cancer Institute, and they went crazy over it because it's a totally new type of chemotherapy. Most chemotherapy is what we call cytotoxic.
Yeah.
It kills rapidly dividing cells, but you have rapidly dividing cells in the lining of your gastrointestinal tract and your bone marrow. And so that's where all the side effects come from. Rapamycin is not cytotoxic, it's cytostatic. It stops cancer growth without all those side effects.
Okay.
So in the early 2000s, rapamycin got FDA approval for treating several different types of solid tumor cancers. Now here's the big but. These FDA approvals have proven to be a hindrance to get rapamycin accepted as a life extension drug, because doctors usually don't prescribe chemotherapy or immune suppressing drugs to people who are life extension enthusiasts. But the big breakthrough came. A lady by the name of Joan Manick was working at Novartis, one of the big multinational drug companies. And she had the enviable position of being able to research anything she wanted. And she was interested in aging, and she got interested in rapamycin. So she designed a human clinical trial with a group of people that were between the ages, I believe, 60 and 80, thereabouts. They were elderly people.
Yeah.
She divided them into 4 groups. There's a placebo group, one group getting 0.5 milligrams of it wasn't actually rapamycin, it was a rapalog, another rapamycin-like compound that has virtually the same effects of rapamycin, but 0.5 milligrams once a week. 0.5 milligrams daily,
Yeah.
5 milligrams once a week, 20 milligrams once a week. They all were on either the placebo or one of these dosages of the drug for, I believe, 12 weeks. Then she stopped. There was a 2-week washout period. And then she subjected all of the participants to the seasonal flu vaccine and did blood work to measure how their immune system responded to that challenge. The people taking 5 milligrams once a week, that was the sweet spot. Those people got about a 20% boost in the effectiveness of their immune response.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal for people that are elderly to boost their immune system to that degree.
Yeah.
But the real importance of the Joan Manick study is that first it identified that rapamycin is beneficial for humans. Mm-hmm. And it also identified that taking it episodically, 5 milligrams once a week instead of every single day, the way people take it for chemotherapy or immune system rejection or preventing rejection, that's the big difference. Mm-hmm. So why is it once a week is beneficial, but daily is going to be suppression of the immune system? This gets into the next part of our discussion, which is mTOR and autophagy. Mm-hmm. So first I'll describe and explain mTOR. mTOR is an enzyme inside all cells that senses when nutrients are available. And when nutrients are available, mTOR sends out signals to the cell. It says, use those signals to build and grow new proteins, new enzymes, new cellular components. The other side of the equation is autophagy. And Japanese scientists won the Nobel Prize in 2016, fairly recent, for his discovery of autophagy. And autophagy gets activated when no nutrients are available to the cell. And so when no nutrients are available, autophagy gets activated, and autophagy is the process when cells are able to target old, damaged, misfolded proteins and enzymes and other cellular components and break them down and either get them out of the cell, which is detoxification of cells, or utilize the individual components to build healthy new proteins and healthy new enzymes. And back over to mTOR for a second. The reason it's called mTOR, when rapamycin gets absorbed across the cellular membrane and binds to this enzyme, they named it mTOR because that stands for the mechanistic target of rapamycin. So it's just the name they gave to this enzyme that rapamycin binds to.
Interesting.
Now, the next part of the story is critically important for people to understand about health and longevity. For 99.9% of human evolution, mTOR and autophagy were in balance. These days, most people alive today are significantly out of balance. Yeah. And I think it's a fundamental problem that is causing health problems and acceleration of biological aging. People ask me, well, what kind of health problems? We are facing an epidemic of epidemics. We've got an epidemic of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, autism, off the charts. 50, 60 years ago when I was a kid, none of these were an epidemic. The health of mankind, humanity, is going down the tubes. Yeah. Really, we've got serious health problems. And I think that this mTOR autophagy is such a fundamental process of cellular metabolism. I think it's one of the primary contributors. There's lots of things that contribute to bad health, but I think this is a fundamental mechanism, and it's actionable. I think people can do something about this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, if we consider that autophagy is cleaning up, taking out the trash, recycling what you can recycle, if you can just do that, and to do that, you have to pause growth, you stop growing, you clean up, you take out the trash.
Exactly.
Now you go back to building some stuff because you have things to build with and whatnot. And, to toggle between the two, it makes all the sense in the world. Yeah. And, you talk about, which I'm sure is what you're getting to now, you talk about mTOR syndrome in your book, which is essentially this world where people are stuck in feast. There's never any famine. There's never any, there's never any pulse. And it's interesting that you mentioned that at the beginning with rapamycin, that the sweet spot is a pulse of rapamycin once a week versus this chronic exposure. And we're seeing this repeated in so many areas, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Chronic stress is a killer,
Yeah.
but a pulse of stress at the right of stress at the right time is what you need. Inflammation. You need a pulse of inflammation, not chronic inflammation. So,
Balance is
it's almost like
everything.
a law of nature, right?
Balance is everything.
Yeah.
In fact, some scientists are saying that rapamycin is improperly categorized as an immunosuppressive drug. It's an immunomodulator.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's doing when you pulse it. You partially inhibit mTOR and give autophagy time to start to function. So how and why did the mTOR autophagy ratio get so out of whack? And in fact, this is such an important topic. In the second edition of my book, it motivated me to postulate the mTOR autophagy theory of aging.
Love it.
So I mentioned that for 99.9% of human evolution, for hundreds of thousands of years, mTOR and autophagy were in balance. But why is it out of balance? Well, our ancestral humans did not get up in the morning and go to the kitchen and open the refrigerator and start making breakfast. They didn't eat 3 meals a day. At best, they ate 1 meal a day and spent about 4 hours per day digesting their food. Sometimes they probably went 2 or 3 days without eating. They had to forage for food, and when food is gone in one area, they got to pick up and move and find another place and start foraging for food. It was difficult and time-consuming, and so that's the difference. They didn't eat all the time. They really probably, scientists speculate that for much of human evolution, people ate once a day and spent about 4 hours per day digesting their food, meaning they went 20 hours without any nutrient intake, and sometimes 2 or 3 days without nutrient intake. These days, food is available all the time, everywhere. People eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, in between snacks, desserts, evening cocktails. So
bedtime snacks, don't forget those.
This is mTOR syndrome. mTOR is always getting activated, the overactivation of mTOR, and autophagy is not getting activated. And autophagy is the mechanism of detoxifying every cell in your body. But the other thing I try to get people to understand, autophagy is the rebuilding of your body. Because initially, strength trainers and weight trainers were concerned that maybe they shouldn't do rapamycin because it's inhibiting mTOR, and mTOR is growth.
Yes.
But what people need to realize is that before you can do that growth process, you need to have autophagy, which removes the damaged proteins and enzymes so that you can rebuild healthy new proteins and enzymes. So autophagy is critical for rebuilding your body. And I use the analogy of a flat tire on a car. You can't put that new tire on until you take the old tire off.
Yeah. And
proteins are massive molecules. Some proteins have 20, 30,000 amino acids strung together, and they're looped, and the shape of amino acids is its function. And there are little hydrogen bonds and sulfur bonds between all the little twisting fibers of the proteins that hold them in its correct shape. But over time, stresses, some of the bonds get broken and they start to lose its shape. The protein's still there, it's just not functioning very well. And so most people alive today are functioning with old, dysfunctional proteins that are not providing optimal health and optimal function. So you've got to get autophagy going to be able to get rid of those old proteins and allow the body to rebuild healthy new proteins and healthy new enzymes. So that's the big message in my book, Beyond Rapamycin, the real importance of understanding mTOR and autophagy and getting these back in balance. How do you do this naturally? Intermittent fasting.
So is that enough? Do you think? Do you think it's enough
for a longer period of time without eating nutrients and condense your calories of the day into a smaller window of time? Most popular protocol is called the 8-16, where you maybe consume all your meals and calorie intake between noon and 8 p.m. And then you go from 8 p.m. to noon the next day without any nutrient intake. That's 16 hours of fasting. And the health benefits are enormous. if people start to do this, but most people aren't going to discipline themselves to fast.
No.
Rapamycin does it for you. I advocate doing everything that's health oriented. So I do intermittent fasting, take rapamycin. There's several other different life extension drugs that people can take. Exercise regularly, eat healthy food, feed your microbiome. I mean, but on the topic of today, it's rapamycin is really, it's a game changer. It is a revolutionary breakthrough in understanding how to achieve healthy longevity. It's not just life extension, it's increasing your health span as well as your lifespan.
100%. Okay, so a couple of questions for you. So you mentioned athletes, weightlifters. And I know that there's a huge concern in many circles about, oh, well, if I shut off mTOR, I'm not going to make any muscle. And therefore, rapamycin is a bad idea for someone who is an athlete. But you rightfully mentioned that if you don't take out the trash, if you don't get rid of those damaged proteins, you're not going to be able to build new ones. But so in terms of the way an athlete might they use rapamycin a little differently in that they might do cycles of rapamycin during a cycle, a particular type of training. And then when they move into the type of training where they're in a more build phase, because a lot of training cycles might alternate between building and not building, might they then lay off the rapamycin during the building phase? Or do you think that weekly pulse still leaves enough space for mTOR to be activated enough to build the muscle and not lose strength in that?
Great question.
Yeah.
I have two answers.
Okay.
First question is maybe.
Okay.
The second answer is I don't know.
Okay.
I mean,
interesting.
The thing I want to emphasize here is this is really a new frontier.
Okay.
There is so much we need to learn. We don't know if 5 milligrams or 6 milligrams is the best dose, or maybe 10 milligrams is the best dose. We don't know if once a week is better, or maybe once every 10 days, or maybe once every 2 weeks. We need to learn all of this. And I'm sure that in several years, 10 years, we'll be able to individualize people's doses and the frequency of people's doses. But right now, all we have to go on is the animal studies, and a few of the human studies, like the Joan Manick study, identified that 5 milligrams once a week. So the majority of people who are taking rapamycin are taking 5 or 6 milligrams once a week. And that's proven to be safe. In fact, a number of the top rapamycin scientists are saying that rapamycin, when it's taken episodically, is safer than things like Tylenol and ibuprofen. And those things are easily available over the counter these days.
Yeah.
So when it's used correctly, episodically, tremendous health benefits. Every single cell in your body starts to work better when you start taking rapamycin. And it's not a miracle quick fix for anything.
Yeah.
I tell people, if you've got bone-on-bone arthritis, rapamycin is not going to cure that. If you have a blood vessel with an aneurysm that's ready to pop, rapamycin is not going to stop that. But day by day, every single cell is going to work better, and you're going to slow down the process of biological aging. And there's a study that was published back in the 1960s, I think, by physician James Fries. And he was highly criticized when he came out with this study, but now it's pretty well accepted. He talked about the rectangularization of the aging curve and the compression of morbidity. And basically, you think about the aging curve over here, when people are born, they have a high level of health, and then 10, 20, 30 years later, they gradually start to have health problems that decline towards down here at the end. That's 50, 60, 70, 80 years old when they're dead. But if you rectangularize the aging curve, you go at a good health for a much longer time, and then you compress morbidity into a very small period at the end of life. And that's what life extension and anti-aging science and technology is all about.
Yeah, it's health span. Yeah. And you just fall off the cliff one day and then you're done.
Yeah. Absolutely. Lie down and don't wake up the next morning. But the day before, maybe you played a round of golf or something.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a great concept. Going back to the athlete, I guess it's going to come down to, and athletes and weightlifters are ultimately all biohackers. They're all people
Yeah. So
trying different things, looking to see where their sweet spot is. And so I think,
yeah.
I think it bears, I think it bears mention. There's going to be value for them, whether it's 1 month every quarter or 1 month every 6 months, or to your point, every 2 weeks, like whatever that cycle is. They need some, and especially
it may be different for a weightlifter and a sprinter, or a 100-yard dash track star versus a marathoner. I mean, but over time, we will learn this. 2 weeks ago, as a guest on a podcast called Wise Athletes. And so we talked a lot about the athletic performance, and I impressed upon them, you've got to inhibit mTOR and give autophagy time to function. It will improve your strength. It'll improve your ability to recover, and everything will work better over time.
100%. So let's talk a little bit about fasting, because, a while ago, I was digging a bit deeper into the world of fasting, and this whole idea of how long does it take for autophagy to kick in is still a concept that's under debate, right? Yeah. You get some people say, oh, after 12 hours, you're in autophagy. Other people are like, oh, no, after 18 hours, you're in autophagy. And so other people are like, yeah, not so fast. It depends. And so do you have any thoughts on that? Because I know that I recently posted something else about another concept, and people are like, oh, all you got to do is intermittent fast and you're good. Which I think intermittent fasting, to your point, is virtually magical. It fixes so many different things for people who are willing to do it. But do you have any sense of this whole question of autophagy and how much fasting?
This is just my opinion. This is not based on solid science, but I think a 16-8 program definitely activates autophagy. Mm-hmm. But longer is better up to a point. We don't. I have experimented with doing a 2-day fast and a 3-day fast, and I think you get a much bigger bang for your buck when you do a longer fast like that. I don't think you should do that regularly. I'm doing a 2 or 3-day fast maybe once every 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks or so, and it's a little difficult when you have a relationship and meals and planning, so forth. So sometime if my wife is gone for a week on a trip with her girlfriends or a professional trip or something, then when she's gone, it's easy for me to go and do a 2 or 3-day fast. And I'll say a couple of words about that. When I first, last year, I tried this. My wife was gone for a conference, and I tried a 2-day fast, and I thought it would be a miserable experience, and I'd be hungry and then struggle through it. I was astounded at how easy it was for me. Mm-hmm. I drink herbal tea, I drink coffee, I drink water all day long, and I realized that for me, a lot of eating is just a habit. Yeah. I walk into the kitchen and I grab a handful of nuts, or I grab a piece of fruit or something to munch on. But when I set my mind to not do that, it was pretty easy. Mm-hmm. And I did a 3-day fast and had the same experience. Very easy for me. Everybody's not going to be like that. My wife can't fast. She goes into hypoglycemia very quickly when she's going for longer periods without food. So everybody's not going to be able to do longer fasts. But I think most people with a little commitment and discipline can do a 16-8 fast. Yeah. Go for 16 hours. And there's tremendous health benefits to doing this. And again, because nobody is doing this, we have this epidemic of epidemics. The health of humanity is really in serious decline.
100%.
It's actionable. When people understand this, hopefully the work I've done will give people the motivation and understand the significance of shifting their lifestyle a little bit to really make a difference. And although a 16-8 fasting protocol is not designed to be a calorie restriction weight loss diet, a lot of people do end up eating less when they condense their calories into a shorter period of time. So many people do lose weight when they shift over to a 16-8 fasting protocol.
Yeah. I mean, I've had clients who I typically will recommend to most people to do alternate day intermittent
That's
fasting.
another great, maybe
so every other
Mondays
day,
and Thursdays,
or even Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. It depends on the person. But then I had one client who started intermittent fasting, and then one day a week, he would go from dinner on Sunday till dinner on Monday and not eat anything. Mm-hmm. And after, I want to say maybe 3 months, he called me up and he said, "You are not going to believe what's happened." And his cholesterol had come down. His blood pressure had normalized. He'd lost inches around his waist. Like, never mind losing weight. He'd lost inches around his belly, which is the
visceral
ultimate
fat
goal.
mass is lost. Yeah.
Yeah. It was transformative for him. And the only thing I'm going to say to people is if you're on a eating plan right now, like a typical eating plan where your blood sugar is going up and then it's going down and then it's going up and then, you're the first step towards moving towards a world where you can start to stretch out the time between your meals is adopting a lower glycemic diet. Yeah. So that you're not riding that roller coaster. And that's probably why someone like you has such an easier time doing a 1 or 2 or 3 day fast, because your blood sugars, your body is essentially metabolically flexible, right?
And essentially what you're touching on here takes us into what I call the microbiome diet.
Yes.
I try to get people to realize every time you eat, you're hosting a very large party. You're feeding 100 trillion guests, your bacteria in your microbiome. And if you don't feed them well, they're not going to thrive and survive. And a plant-based diet is primarily the foods that your microbiome needs. And that's going to be a weight loss diet for many people because they're far more bulk and fiber and less calories in a plant-based diet compared to high-fat carbohydrate diets.
Right. So, okay. So let's go back to Rapamycin because this is the entry point into a rabbit hole. That's going to take us deep, deep, deep.
Here's
another book. There's the book. So for you guys on YouTube, you're lucky. You can actually see the cover of this book. It's called Rappamycin, the most promising life extension drug, Rapamycin, mTOR autophagy, and treating mTOR syndrome. So I've got this book, the ebook, and it's beautiful, easy, fast reading. I love it. But let's go back to, I have a couple more questions about Rapamycin for you. So
and
you
mentioned how people can order it.
Sure.
They can order it from Life Extension. Telephone number is 866-598-6747. If people order my book from Life Extension, they'll also get a free 6-month subscription to Life Extension magazine. And the book's also available on Amazon. Yeah. One thing on Amazon that is frustrating me is Amazon has both the first edition and the second edition showing. And the only difference between the first and second edition that's visible is down here in the lower right-hand corner, this little turquoise area says updated second edition.
Get that one.
The first edition is the first one that people see, and I'm worried that people are going to select the first one and get the first edition because the second edition here has 40% more information than the first edition.
Okay, got it. So everybody, you got that, and it's going to be in the show notes. So don't worry about running to get a pen just yet. Weight loss and Rapamycin.
Yeah.
So can we talk about that a little bit? Because you want to get rich. Tell people they can pop a pill and lose weight, and boom, the world's at your feet.
Yeah, animal studies have shown that Rapamycin significantly causes weight loss, and it's significant because the weight lost is visceral abdominal fat, which is
why? How?
Any theories on that? I don't know the mechanism, but when nutrients are not available, the body's going to start to use fat.
Yeah.
And so you're breaking down fat stores. In fact, Rapamycin is called a calorie restriction mimetic.
Yes.
It's when calories aren't available, mTOR is inhibited, Rapamycin inhibits mTOR. So it is really functioning similar to calorie restriction.
Mm-hmm. So
some of the benefits are the same.
Yeah. Have you seen this? I mean, I know you've seen this play out in people because you yourself said that you dropped a bunch of weight within the first couple of months of using Rapamycin, but you're also intermittent fasting. So the one thing I want to highlight to the audience is if you're going to start using, let's say you decide to start using rapamycin, if you don't change your eating habits and you're overeating, I would expect that probably if there's any weight loss, it would be minimal. I think that to get those weight loss benefits, because people are going to glow onto this, they're going to be like, and it got my attention. So I think what we have to remember and keep in mind is rapamycin is very powerful, and it's not going to override some of our bad habits. So
if people are processed food, junk food junkies, rapamycin's probably not going to provide too much benefit.
There'll be some. It's just not going to do it all. You're not going to get the full run of the benefits, right? Yeah. Like you just won't. But it is interesting that if you're eating a reasonable diet and you're exercising and you're sleeping and you're at the very minimum waiting 12 to 14 hours between the last meal of one day and the first meal of the next day, even if you can't make it to 16 at first, 12 to 14 for some people is an accomplishment. You might just start to see the needle move just by introducing rapamycin into the picture.
And when you say see the needle move, I like to emphasize to people, this is, again, not a miracle quick fix. But so give yourself a month or 2 months to start looking for progress. But I always really encourage people to monitor how they feel when they're taking rapamycin, because you can overdo it. I mean, it's possible to take too much. Yeah. And some people who are also taking other types of life extension drugs and exercising regularly, intense exercise, it's possible to do too much. So balance is critical here, even with your dose of rapamycin. And I'd also so we could kind of evolve into a little bit of information about dosing and who should take rapamycin and who shouldn't, and so forth.
You read my mind. That's the next line of questioning is, so number one, what are some of the signs that a person might be taking too much rapamycin, or that the dose they're taking is too much for them? Because maybe they're doing 5 milligrams, but 5 milligrams might still be too much for them. So what would be the signs that they might observe? Is it all labs, or is it that suddenly you start getting sick a lot? Like what's the...
Well, immune suppression is one thing, and also lethargy, tiredness, weakness. But it's very important, I think, for people to get a baseline metabolic panel and check their labs before they start rapamycin.
Okay.
And then track themselves over time. Maybe 3 months after they start, get a second panel. Things you want to look for are triglycerides, iron, hemoglobin. Those things can change if you're taking too much rapamycin.
And so in what direction do they go? Does the triglycerides go down too low?
Cholesterol can go up.
Okay.
Iron and hemoglobin can go down.
Okay.
And so iron and hemoglobin go down, you get anemia, you're tired, listless, low energy. So that's why it's number one thing, track how you feel. If your energy is good and you're really charging, then that's great. But if people start to feel like they're kind of dragging, then check those blood levels and see what's going on. But those are the main things to track in a metabolic panel to make sure that you're not overdosing, and also to see if you're getting adequate dosing. That's another thing I'm very adamant about these days. There's a blood test for rapamycin. The generic name of the drug rapamycin is sirolimus, SIROLIMUS. And so there is a sirolimus blood test. And I'm now telling everyone, if you don't test, you don't know. You're just guessing. I took rapamycin for over a year. When I did my blood test, I found out my plasma levels were not nearly as high as I anticipated. So now I've now upped my dose to 10 milligrams a week instead of 6 milligrams a week. But you get the lab test through LabCorp.
Okay.
And there's 2 different ways to do this. You can call Life Extension and order the sirolimus blood test, and they have doctors on staff that makes it legal for them to order this prescription, make the order for the lab test for you. Costs $95.
Nice.
And then you can, Life Extension will email you the lab order, and you take that to LabCorp and book your time for your blood draw. I subsequently found out that you can go to LabCorp directly and get the same lab test that you get for $95 from Life Extension for $54 directly from LabCorp. But to do that, you have to have a prescription for the lab test from your physician.
Okay.
My physician is supportive. I've educated her about this. And so she wrote out on her prescription pad with my name, sirolimus blood test standing order for 1 year. Wow. So I can take that to LabCorp anytime I want and get my blood draw. And what most people are advocating, or at least a number of us in this area, try to get your blood draw approximately 20 hours after you ingest the drug.
Okay.
It's too difficult to get it 1 hour after. I mean, you take your drug and then you have to get to LabCorp and are able to get in to get your blood draw. So if you do 20 hours, and maybe it's only 19, or maybe it's 21 or 22 hours, but that little fluctuation at the 20-hour mark is not going to make too much difference. But if you go 1 or 2 hours difference between 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours after you ingested it, the difference is going to be huge. So doing about a 20-hour post-ingestion blood draw is what most of us are doing now to track our blood levels.
And what's the blood level you're looking for?
Well,
target.
Excuse me, you get roughly about 1 nanogram per milliliter per milliliter of the drug. And so I'm now, excuse me, a little frog in my throat here. I'm now up around, my recent dose was 12 nanograms per milliliter, and I took 12 milligrams of Rapamycin. So I'm about in the range of getting 1 milligram per 1 nanogram per milliliter per milligram of dose of the drug. But I think having a plasma level of between 7 and 12 nanograms per milliliter is a good range to be at. But again, I think there's vast differences in people's ability to absorb and metabolize drugs. So maybe you're a fast metabolizer, maybe you're a slow metabolizer. And so I think people should at least do the blood test once after you've been on it for a month or two and check and see where your absorption is.
Okay.
And the other thing I'm using the blood test for is I'm testing several different brands of Rapamycin to make sure that it has reliable absorption. I mentioned earlier before we came on air about the RapaPro, a new generic form of Rapamycin. So I started ordering it and doing my blood test to make sure that it's giving good absorption and good plasma levels. And it is. It's very reliable.
Nice. But, okay. We can put a link to that in the show notes too.
Next thread of this conversation. At what age should people start taking Rapamycin? You would never give Rapamycin to a child or even a teenager.
No.
Because mTOR is the build and grow phase, and you don't want to inhibit that during childhood, which is a rapid time of growth. Nobody knows what's the best time to start it. It may be different for different people, but I'm very comfortable recommending it for people 40, 50 years old and older.
Yeah.
It might be in the future that we find an obese metabolic syndrome 30-year-old would benefit by starting it earlier. But I'm comfortable with saying 30 and 40-year-old people are a good time to start working on it and delaying the aging process for the rest of your life.
Well, and it goes without saying that anybody who's pregnant should stay the heck off it because you're in full building mode. So
also, pregnant women should never take Rapamycin because that's the most rapid time of building a new human being. And so that's another caveat, contraindication.
For sure. And then now who else shouldn't? Is there anybody else that you think should not? This is not the right that you know of. That is not the right because it's, the dichotomy is in your book. There's a laundry list of health conditions where you outline where some of the benefits may lie of like everything from MS to neurodegenerative diseases to cardiovascular disease, like the whole gamut. But
in animal models, in animal models, virtually every single age-related disease responds to Rapamycin therapy. Matt Kaberlein is a doctor up at the University of Washington, and he started the Dog Aging Project. And their goal is to enroll 100,000 companion animals.
They can have my pup. She's 14 years old. Yeah.
And dogs age 7 times faster than humans, but they get all the same diseases human gets. So they want to study aging in dogs and see what they can learn about human aging. So they're looking at every imaginable measurable parameter. How much exercise did the dog get? How do you feed it? Does it have ad lib feeding where it can eat as much as it wants out of its dog bowl, or do you feed it once a day and that's it? And
raw diet or crappy
and the dog's
diet.
living in the same environment as their human owner, so that takes that big variable out of the equation. And then there's one arm of the dog aging trial that's a double-blind, placebo-controlled rapamycin trial, where some of the dogs are getting rapamycin and some are placebo controls. So that's one of the trials.
But dogs don't know placebo.
Pardon?
Dogs don't know. That's why dogs and animals are the perfect subjects.
But the
they have no clue about
placebo just to take that variable out.
All right.
Another trial I want to talk about, excuse me, it's very interesting, is Professor Gorbunova, aging researcher, and she was looking at the genes in long-lived animals. There's quite a few long-lived animals, whales and mammals and different types of rodents and humans and
tortoises.
So scientists have identified the genes in long-lived mammals that are associated with longevity. And so Vera Gorbunova did a very unique animal study. She took mice and divided them into 10 different groups and gave them 10 different, very recognizable life extension drugs. Rapamycin was just one of them. And what she learned is that rapamycin came out on top. Out of these 10 different life extension drugs, rapamycin was the drug that had the greatest effect on activating the genes associated with maximum lifespan. And on the other side of the equation, it had the least effect on activating genes that are associated with accelerated aging. Yeah. So this is not a human clinical trial, but it really gives credibility and some explanation for how and why rapamycin works. It's activating these genes that are associated with maximum lifespan.
Yeah, no, I think what's also interesting about her trial, I took a glance at it, and I think it was in your book you talk about it, or one of the articles. Some of the what's notable is some of the things she compared rapamycin, and she wasn't comparing rapamycin against anything. Like you said, it was 10 things. She wasn't saying anything was going to work better than the other. But growth hormone is one of those things.
Yeah.
Caloric restriction was one. And that's really interesting because rapamycin, as it's not just the caloric restriction mimetic piece of it, it must be doing other things in terms of triggering those genes that even supersedes caloric restriction itself.
Yeah.
Which is why possibly, and methionine restriction also, it beat that. So it's an interesting paper. We'll put the link. Yeah. We'll put the link to the paper in the show notes also. Another
piece of new information that's pretty interesting is that they've identified another way that rapamycin works. It has to do with protein signaling and protein formation. And a lot of aging damage occurs when we get genetic damage to DNA. But they're now learning that there's a great deal of damage that occurs when there's missignaling of proteins, and proteins don't get made correctly. And rapamycin seems to dramatically decrease the improper signaling and improper functioning and building of proteins. So that's another kind of a new finding about rapamycin, another way that it works to improve protein synthesis.
Yeah.
And another topic to talk about, which I'm passionate about, in the second edition of my book, I wrote a chapter on sarcopenia.
Yes.
And sarcopenia is the term that stands for the loss of muscle mass and strength as we age. It's one of the hallmarks of aging, loss of muscle mass and strength. It turns out there's 3 things that people can do to influence sarcopenia, to slow down this process. One is weight training. most incredibly effective. Second is diet. And the third is rapamycin.
Which doesn't make sense. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. But I spent a lot of time on this dietary factor and proteins, because what we've learned is that there's two things that are in balance with proteins. There's muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein degradation. So these two things have to be in balance. And when they're in balance, you're rebuilding new proteins at about the same rate as you're breaking down. There's this turnover. But as we age, if this is protein degradation, it stays the same, but our ability to synthesize new protein declines. And so then you end up with a deficit of faster protein degradation. You're losing muscle mass and strength. But scientific studies have determined that if you supplement with excess protein, you can override this effect and prevent this from happening. The problem with diet in the elderly is that as people age, they generally eat less food.
Yep.
And so if we think about protein, instead of eating less protein, they should be eating more protein. And the other thing I've emphasized in my book is that the United States recommended daily allowance for protein is way too low. It's
100%.
Terrible.
Yeah.
So the bar is set too low. It's like the minimum daily allowance. I mean, that's what the recommended daily allowance is, really the minimum daily allowance. It's like vitamin C, the RDA is 60 milligrams.
Yeah, well, that's ridiculous.
That's a minimum amount that you need to prevent scurvy. I'm not interested in minimal health. I want optimal health. So with RDA, with protein, it's way too low. The RDA should be higher, and elderly people should be consuming even more protein to offset this. As we age, you lose the ability for muscle protein synthesis, and you can compensate and overcome that. Yeah. And then rapamycin, again, is the other factor that really ties in here, because rapamycin is going to help to break down these old dysfunctional proteins and allow your body to replace it with healthy new proteins.
Nice. Actually, one of the hacks I found works really well with elderly people is because they also very often don't have as much appetite, maybe because they're not exercising as not much, or, their digestive capacity sometimes is not the best. I found that, and I've gotten my parents to do this now, finally, it took me forever to figure it out, is essential amino acids. Getting them to take essential amino acids. I mean, they don't get the calories from it, and they need the calories, but at the same time, just getting those essential amino acids in, and more than you think. It's not just one portion. You want to take 3 or 4 portions of these a day. Helps to rebalance that.
One of the things a new thing that I've instituted in my protocol since I studied this deeply and wrote this chapter on sarcopenia. After I do my strength training at the gym, I come home and I do a fruit smoothie with whey protein.
Yeah.
Get an extra dose of protein so that your body has that extra protein to use when it's starting to rebuild the new muscle tissue that you've torn down during intense physical exercise.
100%. Okay, so we talked about this. We talked about that.
How about Rapapro?
Rapapro. So Rapapro is Rapapro, because actually the medication that is produced, the rapamycin drug that is produced by the drug company, you talk about this in your book, is, what is it, $3,000 for a couple of months worth of pills?
Yeah. When I took my original prescription to my local drugstore, pharmacist looked it up and said, yeah, it's available, but I'm not going to order it for you. It costs $3,000 to $4,000 for a bottle of pills, and I'm just going to get a few pills filled in my prescription. He's going to have a tremendous amount of inventory tied up that's not turning over for him. But I took my prescription to one of the big chain drugstores, and they don't have such tight inventory controls. And so I get my prescription filled on a regular basis, and I get it for a $20 copay on my insurance. It's an FDA-approved drug. So many people that have insurance can get it covered on their insurance program for a reasonable copay.
Really?
Many people can't find a doctor who will write a rapamycin prescription for them. As we talked about earlier, most doctors know, first, a lot of doctors don't know about it. Those that do know it are known for organ transplant rejection or chemotherapy. Most doctors aren't aware of rapamycin as a life extension drug. So you have to educate your doctor. But many doctors are in clinical practices where they have standard of practice guidelines they have to adhere to. So a lot of people have difficulty finding a physician who write them a prescription. There are some doctors who are doing telemedicine visits for rapamycin prescriptions. So that's one avenue open to people.
Oh, nice.
And secondly, is this new generic form of rapamycin called Rapapro.
All right. So we have about 20 minutes left before you have to take off. Maybe we want to touch on the topic of our next podcast and just kind of dip our toe into the world of the microbiome.
Yeah,
because, as you say in the book, and you said a couple times, I said a couple of times before, rapamycin's amazing and magical, but there's more to the story. And
this is the booklet, Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics and Postbiotic Metabolites.
Yeah.
People can get the PDF copy of this for free by going to naturalpharmacist.net/Ohhira book. And that's OHHIRA BOOK.
Okay. So we're going to put that in the
show notes. Yeah.
In the show notes, Dr. Ohhira's book.
So I'm introducing people to the concept of postbiotic metabolites, and I need to explain that here. And I'll want to show one more picture. Yeah. These are the large 80-gallon fermentation vats in the sterile warehouse in southern Japan.
Wow.
They use dozens of different types of organically grown food. Japanese fruits and vegetables and mushrooms and seaweeds are put into these vats, and then 12 starter strains of bacteria, and then the bacteria are allowed to digest and ferment the components in the food for 3 years before the product is finished and encapsulated. And during that time, the bacteria are breaking down the components in food and forming secondary compounds that we call postbiotic metabolites. And these are the compounds that are master health regulating compounds for your entire body. It's not the bacteria, it's the compounds that bacteria create. What I'm trying to educate the world about is really what I call a new frontier in microbiome science. How does this whole digestive system work? Well, the primary job of your probiotic bacteria is to digest food components and create these secondary compounds that have a wide range of biological activity. These are the compounds, the postbiotic metabolites, that regulate not just your gut microbiome ecosystem, but also they get absorbed into your system and they influence and regulate every single organ system in your body, especially your brain and your immune system. So again, it's not the bacteria, it's the compounds they create, these postbiotic metabolites. So how do bacteria create these postbiotic metabolites? You have to learn how to feed your probiotic bacteria well, or they won't thrive and survive. What do they eat? The two primary food groups for your probiotic bacteria are dietary fibers and compounds called polyphenols. There are over 8,000 polyphenols that have been structurally identified. They're the compounds that give color to fruits and vegetables. So basically, a microbiome diet is a plant-based diet that gives dietary fibers and polyphenols. And critical factor here that a lot of people overlook is diversity. Diversity. All ecosystems are more resilient and stronger if they have greater diversity. The Amazon rainforest, the coral reefs in the ocean, the microbiome in your gut. So when I'm talking the gut microbiome and diversity, what do I mean? Well, a healthy microbiome has anywhere from probably 800 to 1,000 different species of bacteria. Those bacteria require different types of food. So you have to consume a diverse range of different types of food to give them different types of fiber and different types of polyphenols, so that'll support the growth of the diverse range of bacteria so they can produce a diverse range of the postbiotic metabolites. So this is why diet is so critical for a healthy microbiome, because people have a total misunderstanding about commercial probiotic products. They think taking these high dose probiotics is going to solve their gastrointestinal systems. It does not. And that's, I'm not saying that nobody gets any help from them, but it's certainly not the best and most efficient way to do it. Because if people take commercial probiotics, those bacteria have to survive, transit through the harsh acid environment in the stomach. And the acidity in the stomach is anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 times stronger acid than the pH in the small intestine and the colon. That strong acid in the stomach is designed to kill everything that goes in the mouth. That's the front line of our defense in our immune system.
Yeah.
If bacteria are enteric coated and get through the stomach, when they get to the colon, they have to locate dietary fibers and polyphenols and start the process of converting them into the postbiotic metabolite. That all takes time. And the second thing I point out is that I've got multiple studies that report that from 90 to 95% of children and adults in America, probably in Canada too, do not consume adequate amounts of dietary fibers and polyphenols. So almost nobody is feeding their gut microbiome optimally. So everybody's got gut problems. And we know how bad inflammation is for aging. Chronic inflammation is, in fact, they now created a new term, inflammaging.
Yeah, it's one of the hallmarks of aging.
Inflammation to the aging process.
Yeah.
The primary site of inflammation is the gut microbiome. And that happens when you have microbial imbalance. Too many bad bacteria, not enough good bacteria. Why are the bad bacteria bad? Because they create substances that are irritating and inflammatory. And so you have to have this balance between good and bad. And in the gut microbiome, a healthy balance is about 85 to 90% good bacteria, only 10 to 15% bad bacteria. Everybody has some potentially harmful bacteria, but when they only exist in small numbers, they do not cause problems. So it's microbial balance that causes inflammation. The term is dysbiosis. And why this now links to the aging process, and I've written about this in a paper that was published in a scientific journal titled The Microbiome Theory of Aging. I'll give you that link so you can post it in the show notes. But in that paper, I connect the dots and explain to people why and how a bad diet leads to inflammation in the gut, which leads to the breakdown of the tight junctions and the epithelial cells that line your intestinal system, opens them up, and you get leaky gut or intestinal permeability. That allows toxins to leak into your system, especially compounds that called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. Might be a new term for many of our viewers, but lipopolysaccharides are compounds that exist on the cell membranes of many bacteria that are in the intestinal tract. Everybody has them. They're supposed to stay in the intestinal tract and get eliminated in your bowel movements. But if you have leaky gut, these lipopolysaccharides leak into systemic circulation. They are highly inflammatory, and they accelerate tissue and organ damage over time and accelerate biological aging. Now, I want to emphasize how damaging these lipopolysaccharides are. There's a study that was done with healthy individuals. It's called the double-blind placebo-controlled crossover trial. Starts out, one group is the placebo, one group is getting injected lipopolysaccharides, a low dose, so low nobody's aware of any symptoms. After a certain period, there's a washout period, and they reverse. The period that the group that were the placebo group in the first part of the trial then get injected with low dose lipopolysaccharides, and the other group is a placebo. So at the end of the trial, everybody has received low dose injectable lipopolysaccharides either in the first or second phase of the trial. But again, the doses were so low, nobody had any symptoms. They were not aware of having any lipopolysaccharides being injected. But when the scientists evaluated the blood parameters, lipopolysaccharides caused a 25-fold increase in plasma levels of tumor necrosis alpha and a 100-fold increase in interleukin-6. These are highly inflammatory markers, and people had no idea they had inflammation. So this is showing how people in a bad diet, microbial imbalance, dysbiosis, are having intestinal permeability, leaky gut, and accelerated system-wide inflammation that's accelerated their aging process, even though they're not aware of it. This emphasizes how important it is to create and maintain a healthy gut microbiome. And Dr. O'Hara's Probiotics is the best probiotic in the world, because after that multi-year fermentation system in those fermentation vats, the final product contains over 500 of these postbiotic metabolites. And so postbiotic metabolites have a wide range of different activities. Some of them are directly anti-inflammatory. Some of them kill or inhibit the growth of pathogens. Many postbiotic metabolites are weakly acidic compounds. There's short-chain fatty acids, propionic acid, lactic acid, butyric acid. There's organic acids, there's amino acids, there's nucleic acids, there's fulvic acids. All of these acidic compounds work to create the acid-base balance in the intestinal tract that's optimal to support the growth and proliferation of your good bacteria, and it suppresses the growth of bad bacteria. A healthy microbiome has a slightly acidic acid-base balance. When you become dysbiotic, microbial imbalance, the acid-base balance shifts anywhere from 10 to 100 times to alkaline. You've got to get it back down to that slightly acidic level. And the things that do that for you are these slightly acidic postbiotic metabolites. And if you're not consuming a plant-based diet, your bacteria are not able to produce these postbiotic metabolites in adequate numbers, but Dr. O'Hara's is directly delivering it. So Dr. O'Hara's is the fastest way to institute positive changes in the gut microbiome and help to turn that all around if people do have gut problems. But again, the emphasis, you still have to consume a plant-based diet.
So
otherwise, Dr. O'Hara's is even going to be minimally effective.
For sure. So when you say plant-based, are you saying plant-forward, or are you saying plant-based as in exclusion of any animal protein?
Say that again. Ask one more time.
So when you say a plant-based diet, are you saying that people should only be eating, or are you saying plant-forward, or are you because...
Not vegan, no.
Okay, so you're saying
primarily a plant-based diet, but people need to eat healthy protein.
Okay, good. Okay, good. We're on the same page. Good. Well, there's a study that just there's a
grass-fed and grass-finished beef,
100%,
and wild-caught fish and cage-free chicken. But yes, people need healthy fats and healthy proteins, but people need to get off the high-dose carbohydrates, especially the processed carbohydrates and the sugar. It has to be a plant-based diet.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, 100%. And frankly, even grains, I think, sorry?
I've got an 8-minute YouTube video called Ross's Salad Buzz.
Okay.
And I'll give that to you so that everybody can watch it. But in this process, this is my microbiome salad. I've got 16 different types of vegetables in my salad. So it's diversity. Yeah. And what I do is I process all my vegetables. It takes about 20 minutes or so. You can use a food processor or just do it by hand. And then the secret to my salad buzz is after I get all of this prepared in a big bowl, I squeeze a lemon, and the lemon juice from the lemon provides vitamin C, which is an antioxidant, which protects it. So I toss my salad buzz. It keeps in a big Tupperware for up to a week. This is also a tremendous time saver. So 4 or 5 nights a week, the main meal for my wife and myself is our big salad. I go to the refrigerator, I pull out the Tupperware with my salad buzz, a bag with my lettuce licks, which has got mixed with 4 different types of lettuce, 2 bowls, a handful of lettuce, a handful of buzz, some wild-caught salmon or some garbanzo beans, and feta cheese for protein. It takes 2 minutes to fit supper, and you've got it made for a whole week. So it's the healthiest type of a meal for your microbiome, and it's a time saver, and there you go.
There you go. You got to do the work. You got to feed your guests, right? And so it's interesting about this probiotic, the postbiotic, because have you ever heard of a product called Ars Kosu?
No.
KOSU. I'm actually, I'll send you a link to it. It's interesting. It's also from Japan. And it's also fermented from a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables and seaweeds. But it's in a bottle. It's a liquid. And you drink, the idea is you drink a little shot of it every day. And I think it may not be as potent as Dr. Ohhira's probiotic, but the concept is similar in that it's a fermentation process.
Like to learn about it.
Yeah.
Another comment about commercial probiotics.
Yeah.
People saying this ain't more is better. Mine's got 50 billion. Mine's got 100 billion. Mine's got 200 billion. Balance and diversity are critical. And when you take these high dose probiotics, you're throwing things out of balance and you're losing diversity. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with prebiotics. A lot of companies are starting to put prebiotics in so they can get that on the label. And some people say, well, I take psyllium or I take fructooligosaccharides. That's just one type of fiber. Diversity, diversity, diversity. You don't want to take massive doses of one type of fiber. You want to get a little bit of a lot of different types. So I try to educate people about the importance of consuming a little bit of as many different types of food every day as you can to get this diversity of the fibers and polyphenols that feed your gut microbiome.
So the video is, what's the video called?
The video, people can find my video by just doing a Google search for Ross Salad Buzz, or maybe put the word YouTube in there also. It's a 8-minute YouTube video, Ross Salad Buzz.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to look that up. I'm always down for the big salad. I love that. Okay. Well, sir, I think we're going to gracefully wrap up now so that we have time to say a proper goodbye. You can give people a few extra links of where to find you. We can remind people where to get the book. And then you have a lot of other topics that we want to explore together. So we can have another date. Exactly. So Ross, where can people find you? And
my personal website is naturalpharmacist.net.
Yeah.
And remember, they can get a free copy of the book, Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics and Postbiotic Metabolites, by going to naturalpharmacist.net/Ohhira book. And my book can be ordered from Life Extension at 866-598-6747. And people can learn more and actually order Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics by going to essentialformulas.com. They're also available on Amazon. I forgot to mention that after the 3-year fermentation process, there's also a professional formula that gets 2 additional years of anaerobic fermentation. So there's 2 different Dr. Ohhira's products.
Okay. And is there a reason why someone shouldn't take the professional strength one, or is it just?
And anybody can take it. As you probably know, when an infant is born C-section, they don't get exposure to the mother's microbiome in the vaginal delivery. So I encourage mothers to take a Dr. Ohhira's, bite it, squeeze the paste out on their finger, and put it around in the infant's mouth so the infant can start to build a healthy microbiome.
Nice.
And people say, how long or how early, excuse me, can kids start to take Dr. Ohhira's? As soon as they can comfortably swallow a capsule.
Okay. All right. Or you can probably just squish the ingredients in some food that's not heated up. And
it's a revolutionary product. There's nothing like it in the world. You mentioned there was one product in Japan that might be a competitor. I want to learn about it.
Yeah, I don't know that. My guess is it's not as potent. Right. Yeah. My guess is maybe it's not encapsulated. So maybe it's kind of like
I'm sure they don't do 3 to 5 years of fermentation.
Yeah, I don't, again, I'm not sure. It just brought to mind as you were talking about it. And then when I saw the vat of dark stuff, because it's also dark, but interesting that it's also coming from Japan. So, and they talk about it being some kind of a like a traditional recipe.
Well, the fermentation vats that I showed in the picture are really an external fermentation process that mimics the natural fermentation that goes on in the gut microbiome. So Dr. Ohhira is the visionary microbiologist that created this external system that really mimics what nature is doing in the body.
Very cool. All right. Well, Dr. Ross Pelton, thank you so much for your time today.
It's a lot of fun talking with you, and look forward to our next date.
Likewise.
All
Take
right.
care.
Take care. Bye-bye.